Welcome back to the Corporate Flood and Heat Risk Management Program's Flood Resiliency Module Series, developed in partnership between partners in Project Green and the Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program out of the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. Today for Module 2, we'll be going over the types of flood risk and TRCA tools, and this will be the second in the four-part webinar series of this program. In these online videos, we will be discussing the impacts that flooding is having across the Greater Toronto Area and beyond, as we are faced with increasing frequency and intensity of storm events brought on by climate change and more intensive urbanization. Businesses of all sizes and sectors have a unique opportunity and role to play in mitigating and adapting to climate change through sustainable stormwater management and solutions that not only benefit their surrounding community, but also their day-to-day operations and bottom line. This series will be able to highlight the issues with flooding, their primary causes, how to best protect your business, and support you in finding solutions that help the environment and save you money through protecting your most valuable asset. We hope you enjoy this webinar series and associated resources. As an overview for the picture in our opening slide today, this image used above shows sandbagging on Toronto Island in the summers of 2017 and 2019. Conservation authorities do not sandbag private or public property, but here we see the City of Toronto had placed sandbags down on the Toronto Islands during this time due to higher lake levels and wave action to protect their assets from flooding and erosion. We will go more into some of this work later in today's module. For today's agenda, we'll be covering four overarching topics to discuss how TRCA, and by extension, other conservation authorities manage flooding in Ontario and what they do. For Chapter 1, we'll go over the different types of flood risk and the importance of knowing their differences. For Chapter 2, we'll be focusing on TRCA's mandate and definition of flooding and how conservation authorities manage flooding across their jurisdictions. Chapter 3 will be focusing on flooding-related tools and frequently asked questions provided by the TRCA. And finally, with Chapter 4, we'll go over TRCA's as well as conservation authorities' messaging and flood vulnerable clusters as identified in the GTA. So to start with Chapter 1, we'll focus on types of flood risk. So this is a great example of different types of flood risks numbered on the graphic shown here. So denoted by number 1, this can be seen as private drainage and surface water flooding. The property owner is responsible for this level of private drainage. You can contact your insurance representative for any property-related damage due to flooding and considering adding other types of flooding coverages to your policy as necessary. This is important for businesses of all sizes to understand. For number 2, residents and businesses near watercourses. If your property runs adjacent to a watercourse, being a river or stream, you are responsible for reporting incidents such as blockages and flooding. To report incidents and flood risk issues, you can contact your local conservation authority. And for this case, it would be likely for TRCA or within Peel Region, Credit Valley Conservation Authority. Number 3 denotes sanitary sewer backup services. Most backups occur when the sewer pipe that runs from your business to the region's main sanitary sewer pipe is blocked by items such as roots or grease being sent down sinks, or overwhelmed by sheer volume after a major storm event backing up from the infrastructure that the municipality owns back into the business. If you have a sewer backup in your home or business, please call your regional municipality and consider installing devices such as a backwater valve. Finally, number 4 shows urban flooding. The volume of water generated from a heavy downpour can sometimes cause storm drainage systems to breach and exceed their capacity. This results in excess water flowing overland along major drainage systems such as roads. For hydro or natural gas-related questions, including safety tips for flooding, contact your local utility provider or the Electrical Safety Authority. If you have a problem with the storm sewer in your business's location, please call your local municipality. As we go through today's module, a reminder that the majority of property and/or lot level focus on flood risk adaptive measures have been primarily on residential properties. But as the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors out of the UK from 2017 points out, many of these best management practices can also be appropriate for small to medium enterprises or SMEs, along with larger commercial businesses. Additional measures that we'll also focus on today, designed to protect larger communities or neighborhood reaches, can be applicable to these larger scale commercial properties. Types of flooding. So flooding is flooding, right? Well, there are actually different types of flooding based on the source of water and where it comes from. Riverine flooding, as seen here on the left, is the overtopping of a watercourse's banks, causing flooding in the nearby surrounding area as a result of excess rainwater, excess overland flow, or spring freshet from melting snow and ice, as well as potential ice jam blockages further upstream. Urban flooding is the inundation of the built environment caused by excessive rainfall overwhelming the capacity of drainage systems, such as storm sewers and roads, and happening in more urbanized environments where there's too much impermeable land cover and nowhere for the water to infiltrate into the corresponding ground below. Meanwhile, lake flooding or shoreline flooding can be a seasonal rise in lake water due to the runoff from all the river systems that drain into it, usually in the spring months. We'll go through these three types of flooding into greater detail and how they can be broken down even further over the next couple of slides. So riverine and urban flooding. The reason to make this distinction between these two major types of flooding is simply that riverine flooding falls under the mandate of all 36 conservation authorities here in Ontario. Meanwhile, urban flooding is the responsibility of municipalities within public owned assets and public right of ways, such as roads and parkland areas that's owned by the municipality. Meanwhile, on private properties, it is the result and responsibility of that private landowner to make sure that urban flooding doesn't impact them negatively. To go into further detail about fluvial and riverine flooding, as previously mentioned, this type of flooding occurs when a watercourse, being a river, creek, stream, or etc., rise to due to numerous factors. This can be due to intense rain events, excessive snowmelt, ice jams, or runoff from nearby impermeable urbanized areas, etc. This causes excess water to enter the watercourse and overtop its banks. In this instance, the water then overtops the boundaries or banks of this given watercourse and flows onto the nearby normally dry land, causing nearby flooding. The image above actually showcases riverine flooding occurring July 8th of 2013, when Toronto had one of its most rainy events on record. This image was taken of the Humber overtopping its banks and flooding out Lambton Golf Club just north of Dundas Street West and east of Royal York Road. Pluvial or heavy rain flooding. Pluvial or heavy rain flooding occurs over a short period of time, also known as a high-intensity, short-duration storm event, and it's generally associated with heavy overland flow or runoff, causing urban flooding, as we previously talked about. The intensity of pluvial-based flooding is heavily dependent on the duration of the rain event in question and associated ground covering conditions. Are they dry or saturated natural cover? Are they permeable or impermeable coverings, i.e. meaning pavement, concrete, asphalt, other impermeable buildings, etc., and the presence of adequate engineered stormwater and or green drainage infrastructure. Here in the image above, this shows ponding on a commercial property due to heavy rainfall near Black Creek, near Alliance Avenue and Rockcliffe Boulevard during a major heavy rain flooding event. There's also coastal or lake flooding. Coastal and lake flooding occurs when seasonal rises in lake water levels happen due to the runoff from all the river systems that drain into it, into that given water body as a receiving water system. Our greatest example here, the GTA, is Lake Ontario. This inundation of adjacent shorelines and surrounding areas can also be impacted by urban and pluvial overland flow from nearby heavily developed lands, such as Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area, as it drains down towards the lake. This type of flooding can also occur due to high winds causing localized storm systems, creating associated high wave systems. The image above shows flooding of Toronto Island from the rising Lake Ontario levels here in 2018, with TRCA's flood duty officer on duty. There's also sewage backups. Sewage or sewer backups occur when water backs up either on the residence or owner side of the property due to a blockage, which can be caused by root intrusion from nearby trees or fats, oil, and grease, also known as fog, that's being flushed down that system, or from a municipality sewers side during a major storm event. This occurs generally when there's a combined sewer overflow caused by both the storm sewer and the sanitary sewer being combined together and surcharging during a major urban flooding and heavy rain event, causing it to surcharge and back up a residence or business's sewer lateral, causing backup in the lowest level of that business. Most likely a floor drain or any level of toilets and or sinks in the basement or the lowest level of that business. Water can come back up a property sewer or storm lateral from the city's or town's sanitary, storm, or combined sewer infrastructure, as we just talked about. There's a surcharge in the municipal system, and simply put, there's nowhere else to go but back up in nearby connected properties' laterals. This sewage or stormwater usually comes up at the lowest point, i.e. the floor drain, laundry basin sink, toilets, and anything else at the lowest level of that business. The image above is from the Institute of Catastrophic Loss Reductions, or ICLR's Protect Your Home from Basement Flooding document, published back in 2011. There's also seepage and groundwater flooding. Groundwater flooding and seepage of water occurs predominantly during heavy spring rain events and occur more frequently as snow freshet begins to melt and infiltrate into the ground, causing the rise of localized water tables. Water can then enter the building through cracks and force pressure, known as hydrostatic pressure, through floors, foundation walls, cracks in pipes, and other openings. Seepage, similar to groundwater flooding, can occur due to rising groundwater levels or when heavy rain saturates surrounding soils for a long period of time, and water begins to enter through cracks in the basement walls, windows, or small doorways heading towards low-level basements in a business's property. That's the end of chapter 1, and we will now enter chapter 2. Chapter 2, TRCA's mandate and definition of flooding. Flood risk management at TRCA is broken out into the 5 phases of emergency management: prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. A lot of our work here at the Conservation Authority is focused in the prevention and mitigation, as well as the preparedness phases of this. The Conservation Authority's role are not in the true sense of response, as in boots on the ground, but rather in an advisory capacity to our municipal partners as technical experts. For prevention and mitigation, understanding the risks. This can mean climate, geology, local watershed response, and potential for climate change. This includes documenting the risks, which CAs take over doing floodplain mapping and identification of flood vulnerable clusters. We also can limit exposure to risk by implementing TRCA's planning and development regulation and policies, which we'll get into later in today's module, and reducing the risk, operating a flood forecasting and warning program, maintaining flood control infrastructure, creating flood protection strategies for these flood vulnerable clusters and areas, and the implementation of remedial works projects. For preparedness, TRCA runs their TRCA's flood contingency plan, emergency plans, emergency operations center, which is open 24/7, training, and public education. For response, the conservation authorities provide flood forecasting and warning, usually issuing flood messages through text or through social media alerts, operating flood control infrastructure such as dams or weirs, communicating information and advice to general public, municipalities, and local media, as well as data management and updates to our floodplain mapping. And finally, recovery. CAs take part in flood event documentation and lessons learned to better prepare for the next event, and storm analysis. Conservation Authority's mandate. How does it deal with flooding? Conservation authorities work in partnership with municipalities and others to protect life and property through the development of programs and services that minimize or prevent the impact of flooding and erosion to the general public. CAs also ensure Ontario's water resources are properly safeguarded, managed, and restored. Conservation authorities protect, restore, and effectively manage impacts on Ontario's water resources, such as lakes, rivers, streams, and groundwater. Flood and erosion control and prevention includes our work with structures, monitoring and warning systems, maintenance, and prevention. Our water quality and quantity management include monitoring networks, source protection, watershed reporting, dams, reservoirs, stormwater, wetlands, and septic system approvals, natural heritage protection, which includes sensitive land acquisition and securement, tree planting programs, official plan input and review, and land management works. We also help with development, interference, and alteration regulations, which include activities in or adjacent to nearby river or stream valleys which can flood, and along the Great Lakes and large inland lake shorelines, watercourses, hazardous lands, as well as wetlands. We also provide technical support for land use planning. We provide plan input and review, technical advice and studies, community sustainability plans, as well as stormwater, low impact studies, and natural heritage system design. And finally, we focus on education and recreation for outdoor recreation activities and education of the general public for environmental programs and centers, as well as water festivals. Our core mandate at the conservation authorities is to undertake watershed-based programs to protect people and property from flooding and or other natural hazards, and to conserve natural resources for economic, social, and environmental benefits. Flooding as managed by TRCA. What is a flood? As we mentioned in Module 1, we wanted to go over again that the definition of a flood is delegated by the province. Conservation authorities are mandated to operate a flood forecasting and warning program, which includes the following activities. We at the CAs operate a flood forecasting and warning system. We issue flood messages to municipalities, the public, and media, operate conservation authority-owned dams, provide advice to municipal partners and stakeholders, and maintain constant communication and liaison with municipal and other partner agencies. The definition of a flood as a result of this for conservation authorities is an overflow or inundation that comes from a river or other body of water and causes or threatens damage to nearby properties or people. Within a riverine system, floods are a natural process that occur as a result of relatively high flow of water overtopping the channel within a valley system. To this end, a principal mandate of TRCA is to reduce the risk to life and damage to property caused by flooding. As we mentioned before, our flood forecasting and warning program, as well as the other 5 activities listed on this slide, are part of the job that TRCA provides local agencies and the public with notice, information, and advice so that they can respond effectively during severe rainfall events with the potential for causing flooding and during flood-related emergency. So what do conservation authorities do for our partners to create a more resilient Ontario? Conservation authorities protect Ontarians and their property from flooding and erosion hazards. More than 13 million people, or nearly 95% of Ontario's population, live within the watersheds managed by one of our 36 conservation authorities. We are governed by a board of municipally appointed members, 80% of whom are also elected municipal councillors. Where we as CAs gain our funding, 56% of that is from municipalities, 34% is self-generated, 6% is from the province, and an additional 4% is from the federal government. At the CAs, we provide science-based advice and services within our watersheds. This includes official plans and input into the planning process for the majority of Ontario's municipalities. Our cost of services per household is approximately $67. This includes work and services associated with watershed planning, flood management, flood warning systems, stormwater management, conservation area protection, habitat restoration, water protection and monitoring of our watersheds, and much, much more. Conservation authorities deliver programs and services totaling almost $390 million annually. And we provide on-the-ground delivery and partnerships with our municipal, provincial, and federal governments as well as landowners and other groups to deliver community-based practical solutions to a range of natural resource challenges we face today. So what is the cost of protection when it comes solely to flooding? So CEAs can protect people and property against flooding, and our conservation authorities manage $3.8 billion worth of flood control and prevention infrastructure. This includes 900 built and engineered infrastructure of dams, dikes, channels, and erosion control structures. We protect lives and prevent more than $150 million per year in flood damages and business disruptions. Our programs and services to prevent and control flooding include our monitoring conditions, modeling and forecasting of flooding, issuing of flood warnings, regulation of development in flood-prone areas such as floodplains, providing planning support and advice to municipalities to minimize the impacts of flooding after construction, protecting significant ecosystems such as wetlands and forests, which also help to control flooding and create biodiversity spaces for our species at risk, and educating the public about flooding hazards and what they can do on their own business properties. One of these is TRCA's floodplain mapping systems. So to create our floodplain maps, we have 4 major steps. We gather data, we model watershed features, we model physical features within our watershed, and then we create our final maps, either in 1-dimension or 2-dimensional planes. So what is a floodplain? We have our normal conditions where you can see a river channel and floodplain sediments, and the river channel is meandering across and is quite small. But this low-level area of land that the river actually resides in, you can see how much it spans across the length of this land cover. So in a major flood event during the spring, when the spring freshet melts, or during a heavy rainfall, you can see the river can overtop its banks and actually fill out this whole floodplain, hence why it's lower and it can expand out into this area. High waters in the water level system result in flooding within the floodplain, and these are referred to as riverine floods. These floods are often the result of higher than normal river flows produced by extreme rainfall and snow melt events, as we talked about before. TRCA has a comprehensive floodplain and mapping program. We have qualified engineering staff prepare and approve floodplain mapping studies for TRCA's watersheds every single year. Our floodplain mapping studies are technical reports that use information from each watershed we manage in order to determine the extent or boundary area of a given floodplain, especially as it gets close to privately owned businesses or residential properties. Floodplain mapping studies are used to guide decisions related to land use, infrastructure, and emergency management planning. To learn more about how TRCA creates its floodplain maps, you can visit the Conservation Authority's portal site entitled, How Does TRCA Define Flood Risk? An example of the 2D modeling TRCA uses can be found in our publicly available floodplain map viewer, as we mentioned in Module 1. In today's module, we'll actually be going through how to access this tool and how to use it effectively. This online web application allows users to display the location of the regulatory floodplain in a user-friendly format. Tenants and property owners can search by their address to find out if a property they work at or own is potentially located in or nearby a TRCA floodplain. That is the end of Chapter 2, and we will now begin Chapter 3. Chapter 3, flooding-related tools and frequently asked questions provided by the TRCA. As we mentioned in Module 1, TRCA and our other conservation authorities provide a lot of tools for residents, business owners, and the general public to access to be able to understand their potential risk of flooding where they're located. These tools are provided free of charge and can be accessed at any time on our website. The first of these tools is the Toronto Region Conservation Authority's Floodplain Map Viewer. The question is, do you live in a TRCA floodplain? You can find this out by using TRCA's Floodplain Map Viewer tool. The floodplain management is a fundamental practice of ours at TRCA. This is achieved through policies that restrict development within the floodplain. In locations where the floodplain remains undeveloped, the risk to life and property is therefore reduced. Our floodplain map view allows users to enter their address in the search bar above and see if their property lies within the regulatory floodplain. This is the blue shaded area seen on the picture here on the right. The description here is the floodplain is the area adjacent to a watercourse that would be inundated during a major flood event. The floodplain spill area, another description you will see while using the tool, is where floodwaters are not physically contained within the valley or stream corridor and exit into surrounding lands. As a consequence, the limit and depth of flooding are sometimes difficult to determine. Flood spill areas occur naturally or can occur as a result of downstream barriers to the passage of flood flows, such as undersized bridges or culverts. So as we mentioned in the slide previously, we'll actually show you how to use our floodplain map viewer tool online, how to search it, and how to best search for your property to see if it's potentially located within the floodplain as regulated by TRCA or if it's nearby. We'll show this quick 3-minute video for how to access the floodplain map viewer tool, and we'll walk you through what some of the terms mean. So you can search the TRCA flood map viewer. You can go straight to our TRCA webpage above, or click the second or third option below, which brings you to our ArcGIS section and actually shows it as a full screen option. Here above, we have a disclaimer discussing what are the realities of using this tool and how to access more information from our TRCA engineering staff to get as accurate information for your property as determined with the most up-to-date information available. Please read through this disclaimer carefully and make sure you understand it before agreeing to the above terms and conditions and continuing on and using this tool. So as we're showing above, you can click the Contact TRCA button, which will open up an email and you can ask further questions before agreeing. But if you do agree to the data being provided as is without warranty of any kind, you can continue on and use the map viewer for your educational and understanding purposes. Here we're outlining our watershed boundaries, and above we're going to type in the address of our property as if it was a commercial property you were searching. For this example, we will be using TRCA's head office location, located at 101 Exchange Ave in Vaughan, Ontario. Here you can click the 3 dots or the ellipsis to the right, and you can add a marker so you can search around and always come back. Here we're actually clicking on the floodplain itself, denoted in the light blue, and we can see it's part of the Humber River system, and it's been noted as engineered. And what the floodline engineered means is this floodline has been a part of a finalized TRCA floodplain map, so it's as up to date as possible. You then can click on the legend and look at our TRCA watersheds and understand what the outline of this floodplain means when the color is either a dark magenta, denoting a floodplain spill screening area, which means properties in this area may be within the floodplain or within a floodplain spill, and the corresponding sections of the Living City policies may apply to you. Draft model information or minimum floodproofing elevation requirements may be available, or further studies may be required to determine if your location in question is impacted by the spill area. Please contact one of our TRCA engineering services for further information. That was also highlighted in the disclaimer clickable box and pop up before you use this tool. Below that is a floodplain spill, which is unmapped. And what a floodplain spill unmapped means is a floodplain spill exists where floodwaters are not physically contained within the valley or stream corridor and exit into surrounding lands. As a consequence, the limit and depth of flooding are difficult to determine. Flood spill areas occur naturally or can occur as a result of a downstream barrier to the passage of flood flows, such as undersized bridges or culverts. Please refer to TRCA's Living City policies for further information on floodplain spills. This red line segment does not represent the floodplain and is used only to indicate where the flood spill occurs. And finally, the undefined floodplain. What the floodline for undefined means is this segment indicates where the extent of the floodplain is beyond the boundary limits of the topographical data that was available at the time that the floodplain map was created, and these will be updated over time. So now that we understand what all these mean, we can continue on with the tool. So as we zoom out, We can see our marker is still there in the middle on top of where our search property is. And we can still see where our highlighted floodplain is also still selected and nearby our property. We can then search other areas nearby and see if the different river systems change. One of the most heavily flooded areas, or potentially flooded areas, could be down towards the lake shore, and as a result of the Don River. As we talked about in Module 1, this is part of the area that was heavily flooded during the July 2013 flood on July 8th that caused massive flooding and massive insurable losses. So this area is along the lake shore on the east end of Toronto, and you can see all the potential properties that could be at high flood risk due to being located in the floodplain area. Finally, when you notice a floodplain source known as engineered, this means that the flood line is from a finalized TRCA floodplain map, just as a reminder. And we can see the watershed, as I mentioned before, is the Don River. You can also click the up button here in the bottom and see the different areas of spill and spill screening or undefined areas. And you can see more information associated where that floodplain source is and what the associated watershed is. We can also go out and click the stacked layers button here. And what we can do is turn on and off layers. So we can turn on or off spill screening areas, and we can turn off our TRCA watershed boundaries. And what this shows is as we zoom out, we can just see our floodplain areas within our jurisdiction. And we can go up as far north as our TRCA jurisdictions allow us to, that we map, and we can zoom out as far as we want. We can still see our markers located on our property. We can go back to our layer system and layer list, click back on our TRCA watershed to see where our jurisdictional boundaries are within the watershed, and turn back on our spill or spill screening or undefined layers as well to understand when and if we should reach out to engineering services at TRCA. We can click back on our property slowly or click the zoom to button to jump right back to where we are located. We also have included a URL which you can copy and paste into reports or refer back to in emails to make sure you can click exactly to where your property is located. This is a quick overview of how to use our floodplain mapper tool. Again, if you have further information or further questions about how to use this tool, or want further information and more defined information about potential risks near your property or business, please reach out to our flood engineering group, and you can ask further questions to our staff members. That's the end of this video. And again, if you have any further questions, you can simply email the TRCA general email account that was shown at the beginning of the disclaimer. This disclaimer will pop up every time you use the floodplain map viewer tool. And you can reach out and ask for more up-to-date maps or more details about how close the floodplain map is towards you, especially if it's been unmapped or undefined. The last description, which we didn't discuss, is the floodplain spill unmapped, which is denoted in a red outline that you might see while clicking through on the floodplain on the tool. So a floodplain spill exists where floodwaters are not physically contained within the valley or stream corridor and exit into surrounding lands. As a consequence, the limit and depth of flooding are difficult to determine. Flood spill areas occur naturally or can occur as a result of downstream barriers to the passage of flood flows, such as undersized bridges or culverts. Please refer to TRCA's Living City policies for further information on floodplain spills. This red line segment does not represent the floodplain and is used only to indicate where certain floodplain spills occur. So again, for further information, please reach out to TRCA's general email account or talk to one of our engineering staff that can be contacted through this email. Keeping an eye on things. Another tool that TRCA employs is a gauging system. We create an up-to-date watershed scale data network of stream flow and rain gauges across 3 regional upper tier municipalities that fall within our watershed: Durham, York, and Peel, along with Toronto being the 4th. They are managed by hydrometric technologists or staff who are responsible for maintaining TRCA's hydrometric network of rain and stream gauges, as well as planet stations. During floods, these staff members may go out into the storm to conduct site visits to investigate and document current potential flood conditions. In order to issue timely flood warning messages, TRCA also employs flood duty officers, which require access to current water level and precipitation amounts so that they can determine the extent of potential flooding. TRCA has constructed a network of real-time stream and rain gauges to provide up-to-date and accurate data for the flood forecasting and warning program. TRCA's gauges have been strategically placed throughout the jurisdiction in locations with known flood risks. Day-to-day monitoring and operation of TRCA's flood monitoring locations are conducted by TRCA's flood infrastructure and hydrometrics team. The team provides routine maintenance, flood event on-site inspections, and general calibration of equipment. TRCA uses three main types of gauges, which can be found in this picture. Precipitation gauges. A precipitation gauge is an instrument used to gather and measure the amount of rainfall or precipitation over an area in a specific period of time. We also have stream gauges. Stream gauging is the process of measuring the water level or flow at a particular point along channels within a watershed. Measurements are taken using portable equipment and permanent monitoring stations. Stream gauges measure water levels every 15 minutes and transmit the data back to TRCA. If it has been predetermined that water level thresholds are being exceeded, the Flood Emergency Management Group receives an alarm through email and text. Predetermined water level thresholds are based on a number of factors, including recent historical knowledge and interpretation of TRCA's floodplain mapping and associated hydraulic models to make sure that those warning and flood emergency management messages are as accurate as possible. And finally, we have real-time cameras. We have camera views that have been added to the gauging network as another method to confirm weather and watershed conditions at specific locations. Currently, TRCA operates 3 stream gauges and 3 dam reservoir cameras within our jurisdiction. You can view the network anytime, day or night, 24/7, 365, to see how water levels are fluctuating in river systems located near your business and sign up for our riverine flood messages. You can be notified of up-to-the-minute warnings and preparedness alerts to ensure you're not caught off guard during a potential major riverine event caused by spring melt, flooding, ice jams, or heavy long-term and intensive rainfall events. Finally, TRCA has a regulated area search. So our steps for this are you can search for an address, you can read and agree to the terms and conditions, similar to the floodplain mapping viewer, and enter your street address or postal code for a property for your business within the Greater Toronto Area. Step 2, you can drag and position the marker over your property and click and drag the marker to ensure it's directly, exactly over top of the property where your building footprint will be. Step 3, you can request further information. If your property happens to lie within the regulated area, you can complete a property inquiry to get more information. So above is a screenshot of TRCA's regulated area search tool. In accordance with Ontario Regulation 166.06, TRCA regulates areas where development could be subject to flooding, erosion, or dynamic/moving beaches. This is where interference with wetlands and alterations to shorelines and watercourses might adversely affect these environmental features as well. Any of these activities within the regulated area may require a permit from TRCA. You can use the search tool to determine if your property is within TRCA's regulated area above. Note that mapping is updated on a periodic basis, and not all regulated areas may be mapped. If you would like written confirmation and a more detailed review of how your property may be affected by a regulation, along with other TRCA policies and programs, consider using TRCA's property inquiry or other services, which we'll touch on shortly. These other services include taking advantage of TRCA's property inquiry service online tool by way of a solicitor, realtor, or compliance search. Please note, the information in this tool is not intended to constitute advice, nor is it to be used as a substitute for specific advice from a qualified professional. You should not act or refrain from acting based upon information shown in this viewer without verifying the information with TRCA staff first, and as necessary, obtaining professional advice regarding your particular facts and circumstances. To assist potential buyers and sellers, TRCA will provide an official letter that includes whether property is likely to be affected by authority policies and regulations, what general restrictions or policies would apply if you were located in this area, if there are any previous or outstanding violations on the property in question, a copy of a map of a regulated area, if made available, and if it intersects with your property being purchased or sold. And this letter provides a formal record of the inquiry and provides valuable information to the client in question when making decisions to purchase, build on, regrade, or alter any natural features found on the site. In other cases, the letter serves as an official confirmation that the property is not affected by Conservation Authority policies and regulations and provides the client with added peace of mind. The RCA staff cannot advise you on whether or not to purchase a property, but we are able to provide the facts to help you make an educated decision in your buying or selling process. The fee for this service is $365 per property parcel, along with a response letter for regular service, and $730 per property parcel and response letter for expedited service, if you need it much quicker. For more information on how to apply for this letter, please consult our property inquiry submission checklist, which we will include on the PPG landing page as follows. Alternatively, you can also speak with a walk-in planner at TRCA's head office, located at 101 Exchange Avenue in Concord, Ontario. As a note, this service cannot provide detailed advice, and detailed information about specific properties and proposals should be obtained by booking consultations with our planning staff in advance, either via phone or in person at our offices. Here is an example of our head office near a regulated area search code, and you can see the orange area as TRCA's conceptual regulated area, along with our parcel boundary, which shows that a portion of our property is located within TRCA's conceptual regulated area, and you would have to reach out for further information from one of our planners. TRCA's forecasting and warning program. One of TRCA's core objectives include the operation of its flood forecasting and warning program. Flood duty officers, as seen here above in the yellow jacket, monitor conditions across our region and provide local agencies and the public with advance notice, information, and advice so that they can respond during severe rainfall events and flood-related emergencies. Basically, we're able to monitor watersheds, issue flood messages, and operate Conservation Authority infrastructure, provide advice to our municipal partners, and we're able to maintain communication during major storm events. TRCA's flood risk management functions continues to evolve to prepare and respond to our changing environment and climate. The increasing need of our municipal partners and the well-being of the public, residents, property and business owners, and the community as a whole is to be included. So part of this work includes monitoring. We're able to monitor watershed and weather conditions and operate our flood forecasting system. We're able to issue our flood messages to the public. We're able to operate our Conservation Authority-owned dams and flood control structures as seen below in the picture. We're able to provide advice to our municipalities, and we're able to maintain communications with our municipalities, and through that, other agencies, businesses, and the general public. So what are our Conservation Authority flood message types? We have 5 different types of messages, and they escalate as the certainty and severity of flooding increases and are issued jurisdictionally wide. Similar to Environment Canada's messaging for watches and warning, as well as special weather statements, we don't necessarily have to go in order with these. They follow water safety and conditions if they're seen as dangerous for recreational users, as high flows and unsafe banks are the main concerns. Flood outlook includes early notice of potential flooding based on weather forecasts. A flood watch, seen here in orange, is flooding is possible in specific watercourses or municipalities. And then a flood warning is flooding is imminent or already occurring. Lake Ontario shoreline messages are similar with their categories, similar to our riverine flood messages, but are only applicable to Lake Ontario shoreline areas within our TRCA jurisdiction. They are issued when critical high water levels and waves are forecasted, imminent, or occurring on Lake Ontario. This could result in shoreline flooding and or erosion. The International Lake Ontario and St. Lawrence River Board, or ILO-SRB, is responsible for the regulation of outflows from Lake Ontario and also for providing forecasts. Flood messages are distributed by email to the media, school boards, municipalities, police, fire, and other emergency municipal staff. And you can sign up for these flood warnings yourself through email. We'll include a link below on the PPG landing page to get more. You can sign up for our TRCA flood and riverine flood messages by signing up at trca.ca/flood. You can gain it through Twitter or sign up for email messages below. Note, the flood forecasting and warning messages are provided as a courtesy and on an as-is basis without warranty of any kind. Data or information may contain errors or be incomplete. Toronto and Region Conservation Authority does not guarantee delivery of flood forecasting and warning messages to individuals. TRCA shall not be liable for any claim for any loss, harm, illness, or other damage or injury arising from access to or use of TRCA flood forecasting and warning messages. For emergency management and safety, personal flood preparedness tips. When it comes to flood preparedness, everyone has a role to play. So first, we need to know your risks. As a business, you need to be aware of the types of hazards that may affect your home and or business and the kinds of emergencies that might impact your family or your employees. You have to be prepared. All businesses should have an emergency plan to save time and make real situations less stressful when they do occur. And stay informed. As a business, you should check your local weather online or on radio and television before you leave the house or place of work to make sure that your business or company are not going to be negatively affected by a major storm event or potential flood event. You can visit our trca.ca/flood for more information on all things flooding. And that is the end of chapter 3. Now we'll move on to chapter 4, flood vulnerable clusters. The Toronto Flood Risk Ranking Report was prepared for Toronto Region Conservation Authority by the IBI Group in October of 2019. Through its floodplain mapping program, the Toronto Region Conservation Authority has identified vulnerable roads and buildings located in floodplains within its jurisdiction. These flood vulnerable clusters, or FVCs, also known as flood vulnerable areas, or FVAs, have been grouped together into 41 different clusters, as shown above on the watershed map. By ranking each of these clusters against one another, resources and attention may be allocated appropriately to increase flood resiliency across all 41 clusters. The purpose of this project is to provide updated damage estimates and develop additional risk ranking factors to know where TRCA has to focus a lot more of their effort. Flood risk factors were scored and ranked for each cluster, as we can see above. The way these clusters were formed was based on a flood risk assessment that found a final list of 55 variables that were determined and then grouped into 6 categories. These categories are mentioned as below. Number 1, tangible buildings that could be associated by flooding. Number 2, community impacts as a result of flooding. Number 3, social vulnerability. Number 4, associated infrastructure that can be impacted by flooding. Number 5, preparedness and awareness currently for flooding. And number 6, the potential for recovery and resiliency. After gathering data for each category, the last 2 categories, known as preparedness and awareness, along with recovery and resiliency, were combined into one category, known as preparedness and resiliency. Whereas the other 4 categories add to the overall risk ranking score, this final, now 5th component was combined as a category and offers opportunities for clusters to decrease their overall risk ranking score by implementing strategies that enable communities to become more resilient to flooding. This could include emergency planning, green infrastructure or low impact development practices cited throughout that cluster, and or hard engineering practices such as dikes, dams, or flood berms located within that associated cluster. Note, this next iteration of the map has the named clusters of the different flood vulnerable clusters across TRCA's jurisdiction, instead of their overall flood risk rankings found within the FRAR study published back in 2019 by IBI. We can see here that a number of these flood vulnerable clusters are located in the region of Peel, and they're ranked within the top 10. Bolton Downtown Core, number 6 being Avondale, and number 3 being Dixie Dundas. We will go over these 3 in the next couple of slides. We can see here that the red outline on the map is where the flood vulnerable clusters are located, and you can see that a number of them are also associated, most obviously, with our floodplains mapped out in light blue. The dark blue outline is also our TRCA extent of our watershed that we manage. A note that the flood risk assessment and ranking study was completed in 2019. As such, it utilizes the floodplain maps and models that were available to TRCA and IBI as of mid-2018. Models and mapping updates that were finalized after that time are not reflected in these rankings. Damages or maps associated with the flood risk assessment and ranking study, or the FRAR study. As TRCA is continually updating floodplain information, this information will become superseded over time. In the case of Newkirk Business Park, the entire cluster would be removed as the risk is no longer identified in updated mapping. Note that the flood extents and return periods only apply to the areas within the cluster boundaries on the map of 2018. To see the full extent of the current regulatory floodplain mapping and more updated views, you can visit our floodplain map viewer that we showcased earlier in today's module. So, what are some of the flood vulnerable clusters in Peel? TRCA's flood vulnerable community handbooks, which have been digitally developed by TRCA and placed on our website, can be used to help property owners and tenants understand, as well as prepare for flooding events if they live near or in a flood vulnerable area. You can visit trca.ca/FVA for flood vulnerable neighborhoods to learn more and see exactly where these areas are located. Our flood vulnerable clusters are denoted as an area within the floodplain with a high concentration of buildings and roads that could be impacted by riverine flooding. These include Spring Creek in the city of Brampton, downtown Bolton in the town of Caledon, and Dixie Dundas in the city of Mississauga. So first, we have Spring Creek for the Avondale flood risk map. This flood vulnerable cluster is located on Spring Creek within the Etobicoke Creek watershed. It lies in the Bramalea city center of Brampton near Highway 407 and Bramalea Road. It is a designated special policy area. This cluster could receive significant spills from the river, particularly through the Peel Center Drive area and the Avondale Special Policy Area, or SPA. Now, what a special policy area is, or an SPA, is an area where a community that has historically existed in the floodplain and where site-specific provincial policies are intended to provide for the continued viability of existing uses. The Spring Creek area can become flooded because of the size of the river and the high number of river crossings. Spring Creek and the Dixie tributary can spill over to nearby areas. The known flood locations in this area are Bramalea City Center, which is subject to flooding because the existing culverts and watercourse don't have adequate conveyance capacity. The culvert under Clark Boulevard creates significant backwater upstream, which also contributes to flooding in the area. Note, backwater is the term for water that has been backed up into the river course by some form of obstruction. Another known flood area is Birch Bank Public School. Flooding in this area particularly occurs when flow exceeds culvert capacity and becomes backed up, in particular at the culvert under the Birch Bank Public School entrance road. Flooding may occur upstream of Central Park Drive or Spring Creek. A restricted culvert in this area can lead to backwater upstream of the Central Park Drive and Hilldale Crescent culverts. There is a risk of flooding in the vicinity of Chinguacousy Park due to the channel capacity issues and the storage capacity of the park's ponds. The Queen Street culvert also causes backwater issues. The Avondale Boulevard area can be prone to flooding as well. The Avondale Boulevard culvert creates a backwater effect and can cause flow to spill into the vicinity of the culvert crossing. High-risk flood zones appear just north of Highway 407 along Spring Creek. Insufficient channel capacity can cause issues all the way from downstream of Alfred Kuhn Boulevard to upstream of the Highway 407 bridge. On the map here, we can also see the different types of flood extents. A 2-year storm with most likely occurring in a given year of 50%, a 5-year storm of 20%, 10, all the way down to a 100-year storm, or a regional storm event that is denoted by what has happened when CAs were first developed due to Hurricane Hazel. You can see the different flood vulnerable areas and the actual building outlines of what these different areas are. If you see any buildings that are dark gray with a red outline, it denotes an institutional building. If it's black with a yellow outline, that means it's a residential building. The flood cluster boundary is denoted by a checkered outline of dark black or dark blue. The flood vulnerable roads are shown in a hashed red and white mark. You can also see where stream gauges, real-time or non-real-time stream gauges are located, precipitation gauges are located, the associated water courses are located, and where the flow direction can be seen. We can also see that commercial and industrial buildings are outlined in light gray and a dark blue, and we can see a number of them on the screen here, and heavily down here, south of Bramley Road, and just east of Steeles Avenue, as well as just west of it. Downtown Bolton is another area for a flood vulnerable cluster. The majority of downtown Bolton is within the floodplain of the Humber River, and it's susceptible to flooding. Toronto and Region Conservation Authority ranks Bolton among the top 10 of flood vulnerable clusters in our jurisdiction. The downtown area of Bolton was historically developed around river-based mill industries, long before the advent of land use management practices designed to reduce flood risk. Today, the downtown Bolton community is susceptible to flooding as a result of heavy rainfall events, spring thaws, as experienced in early 2019, and causes of ice jams. The Bolton flood vulnerable cluster is located in the vicinity of Highway 50 and King Street. While the Bolton berm and channel have provided functional flood protection for most rainfall events, the flood event of March 2019 demonstrated the risk associated with ice jams in this area. Historically, ice jams in Bolton have occurred in the river reaches of Hickman Street, west of Queen Street, King Street, and Old King Road, along with Sneath Road, downstream to Albion Vaughan Road. Read more on the Flood Vulnerable Cluster portal site by clicking the corresponding page name for downtown Bolton below, which will be located on PPG's landing page. For downtown Bolton, we can also see the flood extents from 2-year all the way down to 1 in 100-year storm or a regional storm event, showing the most likely in that light purple or gray all the way down to yellow or pink. We can also see the flood vulnerable areas here on the right, with commercial and industrial properties still making up quite an extent of the flood vulnerable areas and building types, especially in the cross section of King Street West and Queen Street South. Finally, we have Dixie Dundas's flood risk map. The Dixie Dundas Flood Vulnerable Cluster is located near the intersection of Dixie Road and Dundas Street East in the city of Mississauga, and is also designated special policy area. Located on Little Etobicoke Creek, and the Dixie Dundas Flood Vulnerable Cluster lies near the intersection of Dixie Road and Dundas Street East in the city of Mississauga. This area is subject to flooding due to a combination of factors. This includes capacity constraints in the river channel, along with backwater from multiple culvert crossings. The Little Etobicoke Creek watershed is highly urbanized, making the Dixie Dundas cluster susceptible to flooding from intense summer thunderstorms and rain events. The area experienced significant flooding during the storm of July 8th, 2013, which we mentioned in Module 1. This happened when flows overtopped the engineered channel and began flowing south along Queen Frederica Drive. To read more on the Flood Vulnerable Cluster portal site, you can click the corresponding page name for Dixie Dundas below on PPG's landing site for this module too. We can also see here the flood extents for this flood map and see the sheer number of flood vulnerable areas. We can see that a large percentage of them are commercial or industrial properties, shown at the intersection of Dixie Road and Dundas Street East, both just south, east, to the left, to the north, and to the upper east side. We can see all of these lie within the regional storm event area, as well as some lower term 10-year storm event areas, where flood vulnerable areas can be located and more intensive flood adaptive measures can be developed on site. This brings us to the end of Chapter 4. To talk about next steps, for our next 2 modules in this series, we'll be going through Module 3, Current Initiatives and Actions to Address Flood Risk, within Ontario, Canada, and internationally that can be adopted by commercial property owners. And then Module 4, the use of low impact developments and green infrastructure to help manage on-site stormwater management risks. These will be released over the next couple months and into the summer. Thank you for your time, and special thanks to TRCA's Flood Emergency Management and Engineering Services Group for their contributions to this module. Feel free to contact any of us here at the TRCA listed above. And for more information about Partners in Project Green and the resiliency and green infrastructure, you can click the link above or click the link to our STEP website and our TRCA Flood Risk Management Group. Thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to having you back for the remaining modules in this series.